Recording. We're good. Yay. Hello friends, and welcome to day 4 of the Drenched in Wonder Cannabis Conversations series. So today's topic is a super important one, and it's a deep well to explore, and I'm only really going to be able to scratch the surface in this short amount of time. Now, before we go any further, I need to say this again. I am not a medical professional. I am not a medical professional. I am not a medical professional. Everything I say here is based on my own experience and my own research. Please do your own research. Look into this yourself. The question that I'm focusing on today, friends, is cannabis harmless? It seems like a loaded question, I know, and it is a question that is far from simple to answer. We can ask the same question of anything, of course, and it's likely a complicated response that we would receive. You know, when we think about, is coffee harmless? Is alcohol harmless? Is sugar harmless? Is shopping harmless? You know, there's a complex kind of answer to each of those questions. And the same is true with cannabis. There's no simple answer. There's no black and white response to this question. But I'm going to reflect on this in as balanced a way as possible, because there are some who do say that cannabis is harmless. There are others, of course, who say that it is very dangerous. Don't go near it. Don't touch it. Abstain. Just say no. And the truth is somewhere in the middle. What I will say is that I don't believe cannabis is inherently harmful. There are risks that one needs to be aware of, and there is a tipping point that exists where, like anything, it can become harmful in someone's life. I've said it before, and I will no doubt say it again, but everyone's experience with cannabis is slightly different. You know, some people say I had the best time in the world. Others say it makes them sick or sleepy. There are a complex web of factors that ultimately answer the question of whether cannabis is harmless or harmful for any individual person. And let's be honest, cannabis is a mind-altering substance. I do feel that for most adults, if the approach is treated with intention and awareness and care and respect, this largely mitigates the risks associated with cannabis use. I talk about this a bit in the book, of course, and the idea of starting low and going slow. This is a very common phrase that's used in the world of cannabis, and particularly with first-time users, you know, the importance of not being in a rush to soar to these great heights. As thinking, feeling adults, we have the potential to avoid most of the risks that come with cannabis consumption. But of course, there are a few things to be aware of and a few potential harms to acknowledge. Before I go any further, I touched on this in the previous video, but I want to circle back to it because it's kind of in my mind, after the research I've done in the process of writing Drenched in Wonder and looking into it myself, there are a few kind of non-negotiables that I've discovered in this realm. And the first non-negotiable is that cannabis is not for children. This probably seems quite obvious to most watching. And naturally, younger people and teenagers are looking to fit in, they're looking to try new things, they're looking to be independent and spread their wings and all of that. You can see how it could be very easy for a younger person to find their way to cannabis use. But what I found in my research just universally is basically this recurring theme of the older you are when you begin cannabis use, the less likely you are to have any adverse effects as a result. I tried cannabis for the first time when I was 27. Most people who I mention that to, they say, "Oh wow, you're a late starter." And it's like, late starter? Maybe that's the perfect time to start. I don't know. For me, it was, absolutely. And even having started at age 27, I still did have a bad experience. I still did sail a little too close to the edge. And of course, that experience is what taught me to be incredibly careful, incredibly respectful, and ultimately led to this whole conversation. When is a good age to begin? It seems that in general, 25 is the answer to that question. Cannabis is something that I feel should be available to any adult who wants to experience it, and no one can really expect a lifetime of abstinence from all substances. We're all wanting to experience, we're all wanting to have fun with this life, and to try new things, and to live. But for the younger people, temporary abstinence, I believe, paves the way for a far better onward journey. And of course, there is this word that often comes up with cannabis use: schizophrenia. And this is a word that sends jolts of shock and fear into potentially many people, mostly parents, I dare say. When I did have the challenging experience that I did, and I write about it in the book, of course, my worry was that I had triggered schizophrenia in myself. again, knowing that this word is so often kind of linked with cannabis, and anyone who's against it will talk about this link. And in my research, I spoke with a doctor about schizophrenia and cannabis use, and he explained to me that there is a predisposition that exists in certain people, and cannabis does not cause it, but it can unmask it in some cases. But all of this, I feel, is an argument for better education and better access to medical support around cannabis. Of course, it's broader than the topic of schizophrenia. For some people, cannabis can cause anxiety, but then for other people, and even those same people, cannabis can then alleviate that anxiety. And of course, it really all comes down to the circumstances, the environment that they're in at the time, the mindset that they're in at the time. And it's not necessarily what you may think. Someone asked me recently, when I had this bad experience on cannabis, was I in a really dark place? Was I really scared? Where was I? And I was like, I was actually on top of the world. I was the best I'd ever been. And that was the funny thing, because in a way, I believed that I was kind of invincible. I was like, no, nothing can harm me. There's no limit to how high I can go and have the effects be so good. And to be clear, I don't believe it was the cannabis that triggered that experience. It was a very foolish choice that I made while high, and it was kind of enhanced and exacerbated by the fact that I was high at the time. You're kind of seeing it, right? You're seeing the breadth of this whole topic. It's not just a simple black and white answer. It varies from person to person. And I feel, once again, just the incredible importance of education and ultimately legalized use, so that we can have these conversations, that we can not have to hide around these conversations anymore. And also the importance of access to a regulated supply. The black market, who knows? Friends, the last thing that I want to do is scare anyone away from the idea of trying cannabis, because like I said at the beginning, if we approach it with care, as we approach everything with care, how much wine do we drink in a night? How much coffee do we have in a day? How much do we spend on certain things? We approach it with the same way, our adult common sense. The more than likely scenario is that we have a tremendous, wondrous experience with cannabis. But this is, of course, the side of the conversation that also needs to be had. Is cannabis harmless or harmful? Yes. There is certainly a possibility of overuse and becoming psychologically dependent on cannabis. It is not how it works for me, interestingly. And the times where I've had to stop, like for instance, when I've been traveling, there's no withdrawal symptoms or anything like that. I'm able to function immediately and well, but dependence can happen. And again, it varies from person to person. Using it with intention as well, like using it for no particular reason, for just out of habit, maybe there's an opportunity to switch that up. And maybe it's like, okay, the intention of finding flow state, the intention of finding wonder, the intention of finding depth and meaning and whatever else. And again, remembering that not everyone gets high with cannabis. And of course, looking at other substances, like there's a very obvious comparison to be made to alcohol, one legal, one not, one normalized, one demonized. Snoop Dogg has this quote: you can put 1,000 people in a room that don't like each other, give them some weed, and they'd be happy taking selfies and doing some cool shit. Put 4 people in a room that don't like each other and 1 glass of alcohol, somebody's going to be dead. Thank you, Snoop Dogg. And this is the thing, folks. I suspect that for most people who use cannabis, they find some measure of positive effect from it. There are pitfalls, of course, there are things to be endlessly careful with, but common sense, responsible use, and approach of care and respect. Again, friends, this is a deep rabbit hole of a topic, and I felt it really important to talk about it early on. To summarize, to the question, is cannabis harmless? It's more that cannabis is not without potential to harm. For many people, it probably is harmless, but it's not without potential. And it's up to us as responsible adult users to be safe, to be smart, and to be kind. Why not? Let's throw that in there too. The 3 rules of afternoon adventuring. I talk about that in the book too. Friends, thank you for joining me for this conversation, and I'll look forward to seeing you for the next episode, where I'm going to be talking about the creative slipstream. For anyone who considers themselves creatively minded, considers themselves artistic, or who wants to be, let's have a chat about creativity and cannabis. Until then, my friends, thank you for joining me. Comment below, tell me your thoughts. Let's keep the conversation going.